The question brought before the text is a personal one, and we receive it with reverence. YHWH. Did my biological father ever test his own DNA? 100 verses were drawn from the corpus and set against this question, and the first verse drawn, the lead verse, is Romans chapter 5, verse 13. It reads, "For until the law covenant violation was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law." Hear what the lead verse is saying. Something can be true before any instrument exists to reckon it. Covenant violation was in the world before the law, but it was not imputed, not formally counted, until the law came. Reckoning has an appointed beginning. This is a verse about what is real, and about the season when what is real is finally examined and set on record. It is not an indictment. It is a door opening. On a question about whether a man ever submitted his own substance to examination, the text begins with a word about reckoning, and we recognize that with reverence. Recognition is not direction. Direction comes from the whole drawer, and from the numbers that stand behind it. So we walk through the drawer, and the first thing we find is a cluster of verses about registers and lineage, about descent written down and sought out. In Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 6, a man says, "I found a register of the genealogy of them that came up at the first, and I found written in it." A written record of a line, searched for, and found. In 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 5, the kinsmen of Issachar are reckoned in all by their genealogies, 87,000. In Genesis chapter 46, verse 20, the sons born to Joseph are named in the record, Manasseh and Ephraim. And in Numbers chapter 18, verse 2, the text speaks of the tribe of your father, brought near to serve before the tabernacle of testimony. The father line is named again and again in this drawer. 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 2, speaks of his dad and his mother. 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 5, recalls the promise made to David your dad. On a question about a biological father, the text keeps answering in the vocabulary of the father's line. Then there is a second cluster, verses about examination itself, about a thing being looked at and known. Matthew chapter 10, verse 30, says, "The very hairs of your head are all numbered." The body is known, down to its smallest units. In Job chapter 31, verse 36, Job cries out for the written record of his own case and says, "Surely I would take it upon my shoulder, and bind it as a crown to me." He wants the record produced. He wants it read. In Joshua chapter 20, verse 4, a man stands at the entering of the gate of the city and declares his cause in the ears of the elders, a formal hearing of his own account. And Proverbs chapter 20, verse 12, says, "The hearing ear and the seeing eye," YHWH has made even both of them. The faculty of examining is itself made by Elohim. It is not foreign to him. Isaiah chapter 29, verse 16, asks whether the clay will say of the potter, "He made me not," and Job chapter 10, verse 8, says, "Your hands have made me and fashioned me together." The Maker knows the substance of what he formed. Nothing about a man examining what he is made of is strange to the one who made him. And running underneath all of this are the two deepest threads of the drawer, the appointed season and the inheritance. 22 of the 100 verses carry the mark of timing. 20 carry the mark of inheritance. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 5, the people ask that the land be given to their servants for a covenant inheritance. In Joshua chapter 22, verse 10, the tribes build an altar of consecration by the Jordan, a great altar to see to, raised as a witness between generations about who belongs to whom. On a question of biological descent, the inheritance thread is the corpus speaking the language of what passes from a father to a child. Now, what do the numbers say? The deterministic verdict of the workstation is yes, affirmative, with the probability of yes at 100%. The Dominion triad, identity, inheritance, and priesthood, is firing together at 1177% of the corpus baseline, a reading of 7.34 sigma, far above the strong anomaly threshold. For a question that is at bottom about identity and inheritance, that convergence is the center of gravity of this draw, and the loudest single channel is priesthood, at 4.9 sigma. The polarity balance reads plus 3.119, affirmative, covenantal favor rather than covenantal tension. The global anomaly test gives a p-value of about 3 times 10 to the minus 17, an extreme anomaly, and the pattern survives the false discovery rate correction and stands robust under permutation controls. The convergence confidence index sits at 97%, with all 6 channels active, threshold crossed. And there are 22 direct textual hits, places where the drawn verses speak to the question in their own words, so this reading is anchored in actual text, not in marker counts alone. The data shows a statistically confirmed non-random pattern across multiple independent channels. The claim class is strong anomaly, and every gate passes. And now the limits, spoken plainly, because honesty is part of the offering. This verdict is a reading of the pattern and polarity of the drawn text. It is not an independent verification of what any man did or did not do outside this draw. The strength of the anomaly is not proof that a specific event in the world occurred. The calibration ledger stands at 150 draws recorded and not one labeled outcome, which means the calibration layer is still uninformative and the verdict rests on the heuristic gate. The honest test of persistence is a fresh draw under fresh entropy, and the discipline is to label each verdict against its outcome and let the days prove it. 2 cautions ride with this affirmative word, and the text itself supplies them. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 1, says, "Boast not yourself of tomorrow, because you know not what a day may bring forth." Hold this answer as a register, not as a verdict over your father. And Luke chapter 12, verse 1, warns, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, that is hypocrisy." Let this answer move you toward the truth of his salvation, as Psalms chapter 69, verse 13, praise, O Elohim, in the multitude of your goodness hear me, in the truth of your salvation. Let it never become leverage over a hidden chapter of another man's life. And we name the tension honestly. The strongest anchor in the draw, the register of genealogy in Nehemiah, supports the yes, yet no drawn verse speaks directly to any modern test. Every bridge from the question to these verses is inference, and we do not call an inference a direct statement of the text. So, what is the answer? Led by the text, confirmed by the numbers, offered between the porch and the altar, the answer of this draw is yes. The text opened with reckoning, it filled the room with registers and genealogies and the naming of the father's line, it numbered the very hairs of the head, and the mathematics stood behind it with a strong anomaly and every gate passed. Yes, affirmative, delivered whole, with reverence, with its cautions, and with its limits named. Receive it gently. Walk in it humbly. And let the Father who numbers the hairs of your head finish what he has begun to speak. Selah. The verses drawn in this altar of reception session were Romans chapter 5, verse 13, Jubilees chapter 4, verse 8, Hosea chapter 10, verse 1, Numbers chapter 32, verse 5, Numbers chapter 19, verse 12, 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 14. This concludes today's interpretation at the altar of reception.